You don't want to look at your face? There we go. Awesome.
Thank you, Sean. And thanks to the preceding speakers, very informative, great talks. Now I'll see what I can do to wrap it up and get into the question and answer session. I did want to first thank my staff, the staffs of the agencies, DEQ, DFWP, and the other partners that pulled this off. It's a good water summit here in Montana. I've remarked to some of the old dogs in the room that the last time the water planners brought this kind of crowd together, it was over in-stream flow, and they weren't very happy. They generally had cowboy hats on and were concerned about what water we were going to steal from them. That was 25 years ago. So it's good to see this group together, and definitely one that is intended to build partnerships. Trying to understand how water is used in Montana and how it's changing over time with both climate and demographic changes in Montana is the subject of the conference. There's a lot of other pushers out there as well, so this is a piece of the pie, and it's complicated enough with just those two. I'll start out with a Yogi Berra quote, which is, on climate, forecasting is a difficult thing to do, especially if you're talking about the future. And the future just ain't what it used to be. So that goes into what Marco was talking about, which is we are in fact facing dramatic changes in the climate, and how we respond to those changes with policy is going to be really critical over the next decades. We do have one thing that we're going for Montana that other states don't. We're a headwater state, relatively low populated at just over 1 million in the last few years we've had in this state. So we still have the chance to screw it up. But we also have the chance to learn lessons from others. California's lessons today can be important. We are just very newbies in the area of groundwater storage and aquifer storage and recovery. We can learn a lot. We have to build some flexibility into our paradigms that we don't have today. Climate change is driving changes in how we work even today. In 2008, 7 leading scientists concluded that stationarity is dead. And stationarity is the underpinning of what water science is based on. It's the period of record. It's the average or mean. It's the percentile flow. And when you kill stationarity, all of that becomes very difficult to use as a basis to plan your future. That's what we've been doing. That's what the Army Corps of Engineers flood storage is based on. That's what the Bureau of Rec uses. That's what DNRC uses to manage our reservoirs. And if you think that underpinning is changing in a dynamic way, then how we manage has to also change in a more dynamic way. We can't use the past as a predictor of the future, but we're not completely out. We are not lost in the woods. We understand how changing variables and equations can be modeled and predicted and provide us a picture of what is risk and a picture of what is uncertain. And we have technology today that can help us managers manage into the future. But you have to change. You can't keep thinking that just saying the past is what it is and we don't have to change is going to work that well into the future. The good data part. One thing that I heard on the Water Policy Interim Committee yesterday, and certainly something that I've taken hits on in my last 6 months, is we have reduced the funding for USGS stream gauges in the state of Montana. Both DFWP and DNRC have cut about 12 stream gauges. That doesn't sound like a priority in data collection. It's probably not. It represents that we have both agencies have suffered fairly significant cuts to our operating budgets. For DFWP, it was the Dingle-Johnson funds that they received nationally, and for DNRC, it was a cut in general fund dollars, and we have to cut somewhere. When you have less money, you have less money to collect data. And so that's just the reality. What I want to warn you about in this audience is it's not just stream gauges, guys. and women. And by the way, there's a good diversity in this crowd, men and women, and I really appreciate that. It is our SNOTEL sites. We're not collecting as much data on the snow as we used to. It's frankly an anemic and always has been a system of collection of soil moisture that we're doing better than we have in the past, but it is still, in this large of a state, a very small sample of soil moisture. All data collection sources are being pressed. On the positive side, NASA has deployed a number of Earth-looking satellites over the last 3 years that will bring in big data that we have never had before in our existence as humans. The capacity to understand water resources in this world is increasing dramatically. But what it does need is good ground truthing data collection. That stream gauge network is a crucial network. You can go to a national model right now that shows the pulses of water fabricated by a simulation model across every huck in the United States. That is only good information to the extent that it ties back to good data on the ground. So we do definitely need continued support for funding, and that is going to have to come at the legislative level, both in Congress and at the state level, because they appropriate the monies. In terms of data, we've tried to address this issue of stationarity a couple of ways. One is that your average stream flow or your average snowpack may not be what you think it is. It's more likely to be a moving average. So rather than period of record, a lot of the federal agencies are reporting their data in 20 or 10-year increments. And while you don't really know what an average year in temperature or an average year in water supply, it's going down in water supply and going up in temperature. It's just being reported in smaller segments than the period of record. That's one way to manage it. Another way we're doing, trying to deal with this issue of a changing climate is to go back in time and recreate and synthesize records through tree ring studies. We've done that in the Missouri. Preceding us was the Colorado, and there's been great work by scientists across the nation in trying to recreate what the history of water was across the terrestrial landscape of the United States. That does help us because it brings in greater numbers of drought periods and wet periods, and so we have a longer period to see variability in climate, which does take a long time to measure in actual year data. So that's helpful, but I do think that we're going to continue to rely on academia connecting with policymakers to help us find new ways to look at the future so that we can plan for it. So population, really interesting portrait of Montana's economy by Patty. Where are the jobs? Well, that's where the people are. We do see, I imagine if you were to look at the Bakken field between 2008 and 2015, there was an increase in eastern Montana population that was associated with the oil boom in the Bakken. That has subsided dramatically. That population was not sustained. That is not atypical. I saw the same thing in 1981 when we had a nice oil boom out in eastern Montana. That was not sustained much longer than 3 years either. So we see these bumps, but it continues to grow in the mountainous regions of Montana. That's where people want to live. That's where the amenities that we enjoy are, and that's where those investment dollars are being spent. Some of us truly do like the big sky part of the state, which is eastern Montana. So if you don't live there, plan on going out there. You can still see the Milky Way at night without any light. So we're growing in places and frankly replacing agriculture with people. That's where the water is. Generally, we haven't valued the ag water as much as we valued the ag land for development. One of the hopes of establishing a water market is the value of water is actually increased to the point that when you're subdividing a property, you're looking at your water right as equally valuable in that subdivision as the land itself. That has not been true today. A large reason for that is we give away water in Montana through exempt wells. And as long as we have free water, there will not be a water market, because you don't need to buy it, you can just put a well in. On the other hand, Montana, as opposed to California, is way ahead of the curve on groundwater, surface water interaction. A lawsuit, TU versus DNRC, plus a bunch of other folks in 2005 was decided connecting ground and surface water as a single resource by law in the state of Montana. That's 13 years that has been in existence. It caused several policy changes. In 2005, we bumped up, Representative Walt McNutt saw that we hadn't done anything on the adjudication. We hadn't. They fired 40 people in DNRC in 1987. We never filled those positions, and 18 years later, the legislature said, you hadn't gotten anything done. Well, yeah, we don't have any people. So they restaffed it in 2005. We're now better than a decade into the final lap of the adjudication. Another thing happened in 2005, which was to respond to, or 2007, to respond to the TU decision. It was House Bill 361, maybe. Walt McNutt sponsored it. And then subsequently, House Bill 40 in 2009. Senator Konar sponsored that. Major policy changes on how we allocate water to accommodate the connection of groundwater and surface water. So we certainly make the connections. I'll end here because I know this little sign will come up here pretty quick. I'm not paying attention, and I haven't been looking at my notes, so you've got to give me a second to actually find what I'm going to say next. Maybe. There is a book that I want to recommend to you. Here we go. It is, okay, change this, press the button. A Ditch in Time. The City, the West, and Water, Patricia Limerick. She's a professor from University of Colorado. She's an excellent writer, so this is a good read. It's a 2012 publication, and I'll just read some of the mistaken assumptions and better assumptions that she concludes this with. Again, this is at the end of the book, and I think it has something to tell us today. So the first mistaken assumption is that the supply of water and the rate of population growth and residential development are inherently and inevitably intertwined. You heard that today, that we're going to grow where the water is, and not so much. That just hasn't proven to be true. You saw it in the statistics from California. Municipal governments have an ability to reduce the amount of water consumed and grow their population. Now, where it hurts you is in drought. It's kind of hardened out there, and they don't have as many loose ends to kind of make it up for a tight year. But in fact, Denver saw its largest population growth just after they terminated a reservoir called Two Forks that was going to be the essential ingredient for Denver to grow. And that the headlines when the state was finally hammered into the ground and it was dead, the headlines in the Denver paper is Denver will stop growing. It then experienced the largest growth in its history. So the better assumption is water is only one factor of population growth and not always the most important one. Controlling water does not necessarily translate into the authority over growth. So those people who are protecting land use planning from us water planners, don't worry, there's a lot of other variables. Mistaken assumption number 2. Power over water in the American West has been concentrated into the hands of a small, centralized, somewhat toxic elite. Now, if you're at Denver Water, you know that is you. Because you have brought water from the Colorado to your growth area, and you're hated in the west side of the valleys because you've stolen the water from the river and it's not flowing down to the Colorado property. It also is agriculture in Montana. You know, you get a lot of people just with animosity towards agriculture because that's where the water rights are. Or maybe it's Native American tribes because in Montana we've settled reserved water rights for you and you actually have an allocation of water reflecting your reserved rights. That's just not an effective way to look at it, and it's just not true. Agricultural operators don't operate in some big conspiracy together to take water away from fish and cities. They're individual water rights. They're held by families, oftentimes for generations, and they're doing the best they can. And in the Gallatin Valley, I saw Representative Walt Sales is here somewhere. Without my glasses, I can still pick them out. They're working to keep water in the Gallatin. They know, as the ditch companies that divert water out of the lower Gallatin, they can dry that river up every year, and it is their right under law to do so. They choose not to. They share that short water supply with the stream, in part for self-preservation, because they know Bozeman would come unglued if year after year the Gallatin ran out of water before it confluenced with the Missouri. It's also out of an ethic of conservation and community. And they walk it every day. So there aren't these big hoarders of water trying to control your future. They're just real people trying to make a living and live in this state, and they believe oftentimes in the state as much as anybody. Mistaken assumption number 3, in opinions on and judgments of competing demands for water, use for farms and ranchers carries a greater ethical integrity and is more justifiable than water use for environmentally parasitic cities and suburbs. All right, so the farmers got the upper hand on this one. Well, maybe not. So that's where I think watershed groups really come in to bear, right? It is the collaborative effort of the watershed group of bringing agricultural operators who own the land, oftentimes own the water resources, in together with a mix of municipal interests, with, as was described in California, the environmental interests that often are the most impacted in a water short year, and having a conversation about how we work together in building those drought plans that will be essential for our future and what we actually do to make a difference when we don't have enough water. Again, the collaboratives provide the better option, and there are many good reasons to reject the old appraisals of the distribution and virtue of the corresponding allocation of water between rural and urban areas. And finally, I'll leave you with this one. Although members of the engineering profession should be reprimanded when they make messes, they should generally be left to their own devices as far as infrastructure works best when the great majority of citizens never have to pay any attention to it. So there was this dam building era over the, basically from the New Deal era through the 1970s when Carter killed the federal projects in 1977, where the engineers were God. States had state water engineers. Why did they have water engineers? Because they were building dams and canals. It was a paradigm of development, of reclaiming the West. We're now about 40 years past it, but we still preach the gospel. What I would say is that engineers do have solutions that we have to pay attention to, but they can only serve our citizens and serve the public interest if we're engaged and can help them identify the goals that we want to achieve. I'll give you a good example. NRCS for a long time, through the EQIP program, was paying for center pivots because increased on-farm use efficiency was going to be the savior of our streams. If they just used water more efficiently in the ag world, we could have enough water to spread around. What in fact happened, and it was the source of the Smith River Challenge TU versus DNRC, was an expansion of irrigation and an increase in consumptive use because of better technology to irrigate crops. I mean, part of the reason we're growing better crops today is we're getting water to the root zone and they're consuming all the water that they get. In alluvial valleys of Montana, inefficient on-farm use of water has resulted in cooler and greater flows in August. That's just a fact. So what happens when you turn it all into high-efficiency center pivots? The rivers run dry, they can divert water at lower levels, and we can dry up the streams. So focus on on-farm efficiency to gain a better balance between environment and agriculture fails. Another idea would be to pick a location in a basin. Let's say down where at Twin Bridges, where we create the Jefferson River. If we tried to get more water at that point, what would it take? And still have an ag economy and growth for municipalities. That's another measure of efficiency. It's a basin efficiency question. And it may basically say, let's keep some of those flood irrigated pastures up there flooded in the Big Hole, in the Beer Head, and the Ruby. Because that water is returning to us at a critical time. And my time is up. I'll find, since I'm a director, I'm going to take a couple extra minutes. One place that I didn't have and Barry, you're probably right, I turned my notes out. But the one place that I did want to focus is storage and the importance of storage in Montana. I do not see an era of building new dams. We will have some investments in traditional water storage that will be effective, and I think that's really important that we have an effective use if we're going to build a reservoir. The largest consumption of water is the evaporation off of our existing reservoirs in the state. If you think about how big Fort Peck is and how much water it evaporates, it's massive. But what I do want to do is that, from a policy perspective, build in flexibility about where we can use existing stored water. Right now it is tied to the very acre you irrigate it, and my department would put you through a very difficult screen if you want to move it to someplace else. We have a high transaction cost in changing stored water from one place to another. That is often the case. I would like to figure out a way to do better on that. The other thing is we're just entering into aquifer storage and recovery. If we could build flexibility into how we use stored water and that it can go to any place that we can put it, we are hamstrung. And if I were to go back 150 years, I would say that any right was 100% consumptive, not because they did, but because we could then move that water to another use without having this compounding issue, which is return flows and adverse effect. But that is in fact your right as a Montanan. You get the right to return flows, and you can object if I try to take it away. I'm trying to get just a little nick, which is stored water, and being a little more flexible, and certainly in aquifer storage and recovery to be more flexible, so that we might have some pathway into the future. And at that point in time, I will give up my chair, and we can go into the question and answer. Thank you.